The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. My name is Suzanne Sherman, and you have tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where here we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. Happy President's Day, ladies and gentlemen. It is February 19th, year of our Lord 2018, where we celebrate all of our past and present elected kings. I will be getting into that in a little bit. I want to start out, you can follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. Also, my page /Suzanne Sherman or Cowgirl Esquire. We have a fan page, facebook.com/CRN. I have a few things to say about Facebook. We also have started, and I'll get into that in a few moments. We have also started a profile for myself and Jeff Johnson. Daniel Bailey has one. The Cerberus Radio Network now has a page on the Gab network. It is a new form of social media where we are not censored. I have been in Facebook jail for about 3 or 4 days, and I just got my release yesterday. We have a YouTube channel, and I'm delighted to say that we are getting more subscribers. It is Cerberus Radio Network over on YouTube. Please check us out there. You can see any of our shows. Just watch them at your leisure. We have a feed on Radio Co. So if you do go to our network on Facebook, you can just listen to the shows that we have. We have a schedule. I'm not quite sure what it is. Jeff tells me, and I forget all the time. But Jeff Johnson, who is one of the co-founders, he's actually the owner of the network, and he founded this with Daniel Bailey. Jeff just did his show, The Paradigm Shift. So you can go to our YouTube channel and go to our Facebook page, find the link, and listen to the show. We try to go back to back at least once a week. He had a great show this morning. Jeff and Daniel were live also last night on the Renegade and the Rambler radio show. Again, you can go back and hear that. Daniel Bailey also has his show, The Bailey Report. We also have a show called Brush Fires of Freedom. That is a rebroadcast from a show out of Tucson, Arizona. Sean Hoffine. The tone is set when the show opens with a quote from Sam Adams, and this is something that I can relate to. We all can at our network here. It does not take a majority to prevail, but a tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. Fantastic quote. Great way to start off the show. And again, this is a sentiment that we relate to over here. Mike Meharry from the 10th Amendment Center has some new podcasts that I believe we have added now to our opportunities for you to listen to his podcasts. He also has one with Gold Schiff, Peter Schiff. And if you're interested in learning about investing in gold, you can do that as well. I want to also introduce, if you haven't heard of them yet, The Other Side with our new hosts, Joshua and Mike. They recently did, I think it was 2 weeks ago, a podcast about Abraham Lincoln. Since it is President's Day, I'm going to find that. Jeff, we should probably repost that, because this week, many pundits are going to be talking about our presidents. And one of them that I just had heard, Mark Levin, I sometimes tune into SiriusXM Patriot on my way to and from the gym. I've got about a 30-minute drive up here from the mountains down into town. When somebody called in and he referred to Lincoln as the greatest emancipator of all time, and then you use the Declaration of Independence to bolster that assertion. And I'm actually doing some research, and I'm going to do a show on that topic myself. So we're going to be speaking the truth. Jeff was talking about the proper role of the executive. Last Monday, I introduced this topic as well, where we talked about the proper role of the executive. If you missed it, also on Friday, I had the opportunity to do the afternoon drive show on K-Talk Media, and that was on the Shooting You Straight with Maxon and Platts show. Shiloh Platts and I were co-hosting the show. Kevin Gutzman came on, and we talked about the proper role again of the executive, as well as a runaway federal judiciary, which has been responsible for inverting our federal system into one of a national system. If you missed that show, the links are on our pages. That's a fantastic show. I highly encourage you to go to that one. Jeff, thank you for producing my show. I know you just did yours, and I have been in Facebook jail, and you have been talking about this alternative called Gab. And we set up some accounts there. It seemed to be very active. I'm hoping it stays active. And my goal is hopefully people from Facebook, like that are like-minded like us, can move over there. I've noticed lately I was getting many friend requests from people I was already friends with on Facebook. So I asked one of my friends whom I've known for many years, have you been hacked? Is this your account? And the response was, I was shut down and I'm setting up a new account. Well, lo and behold, right after our show last week, I got a notice when I tried to go somewhere else and navigate to another page that due to a recent violation of Facebook's community standards, my account was going to be closed for 3 days. And if I wanted to see the offensive post, I could click here, I clicked there, and it showed something that was, I think, a comment that was probably posted due to the context of it over 8 years ago. So what I'm noticing here, and remember now, Dr. Ron Paul, no way am I comparing myself to him, but this is just for illustration. YouTube had tried to demonetize him by saying that this account is not suitable, may not be suitable for advertisers. So if they don't ban you like they did with Dr. Paul, they can make it so it's, you have no financial incentive to be heard anymore. And I've had many friends saying their Facebook accounts are shut down. And here's what they did. This could not have been from somebody just scrolling back. You can't possibly scroll back that many years on Facebook. I think they have people in there now scrolling back as far as they can, finding something that they find objectionable and silencing us. So again, people say, well, just get a backup account. Why would you want to continue to do business with somebody that doesn't want you there? So Jeff, I hope that maybe we can make this take off over at Gab and have other formats where we can talk to each other. We know Twitter's doing the same thing. I've talked many times about this trifecta of evil, trying to keep us, our voices silent, disenfranchising us from the public debate. And we have the government, the education system, and the media. And I think the social media outlets here that are trying to censor us really fall into all three categories. We know Mark Zuckerberg had met with the Obama administration many, many times. We know that Cass Sunstein, somebody that Obama was considering for the United States Supreme Court, had advocated having spies and trolls and on Facebook to monitor accounts and also to try to sway opinions. So we really have a government trying to free public debate, trying to inhibit free public debate, because obviously the voices of conservatism or limited government run in direct contravention to the expansive government. Even the false conservatives advocate it. And speaking of false conservatives, Jeff, we had an announcement out here. I guess it went nationwide, pardon my French. Mitt Romney plans to run for Orrin Hatch's seat out here, Senate seat in Utah. Orrin Hatch is retiring. And Mitt Romney, paraphrasing our good friend Kevin Gutzman, a guy from Michigan who is a governor from Massachusetts, wants to take Utah values to Washington, D.C. This is so convoluted, I actually had to write it down before the show. I don't think anybody remembers this, but during the GOP debates for the election coming up in 2012, when Romney was running against Obama, trying to keep him from having a second term, I feel Mitt Romney deliberately threw the debate or through the election. He didn't try at all. I think also when there was many examples of voter fraud, the GOP did nothing to challenge it at all. And here, look at the squawking we have now after Hillary Clinton was defeated about Russian collusion and so on and so forth. But I wanted to raise an issue that it was just completely ignored. Mitt Romney and the hopeful Rick Perry from Texas, the governor of Texas, were having a debate about illegal immigration. And Mitt Romney was talking about a discussion he had with his gardener, who the gardening contractor who was hiring undocumented workers. And these were the words out of his mouth. He said, "You can't be hiring these guys. I'm running for president." And Rick Perry just let that one go by. And to me, this tells me, so what is the definition of character? Character is what you are doing when nobody's looking. Why did he not address this issue before he was running for president? Because he really didn't care. These values didn't care. And Mitt Romney is stupid enough to admit that in a national presidential election debate. And what's worse is another candidate was too stupid to call him on it. And what's worse is the media is too stupid and corrupt to call him on it. And the American people are too stupid and distracted to even remember this, or should have been up in arms over this at the time and said, wait a minute, you are such a fraud. And what did we do? The GOP put him up as our candidate. And not surprisingly, he lost. Jeff, do you remember that?
I do vaguely remember that whole incident.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just shows who he is, and I truly believe he is wrong for Utah, and it's going to be interesting to see what the people of Utah do, meaning the LDS Church. Are they going to put the LDS Church up before they put the people of Utah up and what is best for the state of Utah? Go ahead.
Well, it's really interesting. You have, okay, the Clintons are from Arkansas. And where did she run for senator when she became a senator? New York. So where's Romney from? Michigan and through Massachusetts. And where is he going to go? He's going to run in Utah. It really, there is something wrong. And this highlights the reason why we need to get rid of the 17th Amendment. Because,
I totally agree.
Because why would Utah, why would the legislature of Utah even consider appointing Mitt Romney? They wouldn't. They would look for somebody that actually lives in Utah and actually has the best interests of Utah's citizens in mind. So, again, this is just totally ridiculous, and that's why the 17th Amendment is totally destroyed. It made us a democracy. We are not a republic. We're not a representative republic. We are a democracy now.
And, we had a caller call in when I was on the radio on K-Talk last week, and he asked me what I thought of the 17th Amendment. And I said the same thing. I said the founding generation was very much against forming a democracy, because really what democracy is nothing more than mob rules. That's why we have a constitutional republic, where even though somebody might be outvoted, we still have representation, and their rights should be regarded. Now we kind of inverted. We have very minority segments of the population, like 3%. I'm talking about LGBTQ element of P, making the most noise and getting the most attention. But I'm not going to get into that one today. But my take on Mitt Romney is he is bad for Utah. He is bad for the pardon my French, the nation. And let's face it now, every senatorial seat, thanks to the 17th Amendment, and this is what I said on K-Talk, has turned us, every senatorial seat is a national issue, because everybody wants these national policies implemented, and the Senate is the way to get them. That's why the Alabama election was so hotly contested, and it really should not have been. Mitch McConnell thinks the Senate belongs to him. Look at how he got involved. Why is a Kentucky senator trying to dictate what happens in an Alabama election? We need to get rid of the 17th Amendment. Will we? I really don't think we have. I really think that we have gone too far to ever remedy what we have here. And I have a feeling Mitt will be elected. We do have a couple other candidates. I know there's another Republican one that's vying. His name eludes me right now. But we also have a Libertarian candidate. His name is Craig Bowden. He's been on my show once before. We were talking about getting him on again at some point. And I don't think the Libertarian Party has a lot of credence. I don't think it will do well in Utah. But I'm hoping that Craig can get his message out. I'd love to see him elected. I think that would be fantastic for us. He is very much for limited government and for respecting the proper role of government. And this guy gets federalism. So maybe Utah can wake up and elect somebody other than Mitt Romney, because again, I think he would be a disaster. Something else I remember him saying during the debates, or it was with an interview. It was during an interview at the time, and it was a discussion on foreign intervention and our policy of being the world's police. And when they were asking him about this, he was very emphatic in saying, look, we have got to be in these places before trouble starts. Now, compare and contrast that to the sentiments of the founding generation. For instance, I believe it was George Washington was one of them who said we should have open and friendly, and Thomas Jefferson, who said we should have open and friendly relations with all, entangling alliances with none. George Washington, I believe it was in his farewell address, also warned us about the policy that has devolved into this worldwide intervention that really took off in the Wilson era. And this is, Jeff, can you please tell me how we can be around the world before trouble starts everywhere?
Well, that's what we're doing now, isn't it? I mean, we're in Syria. We have no declaration of war. Matter of fact, we don't even, who are we fighting? I mean, I know we're supposed to be fighting ISIL, but it seems to me we're killing more Syrian troops and Russian advisors than we are the supposed real enemy. I don't get it. We're just killing anyone. We kill everyone before we even know why we're killing them, I guess. I don't know. I'm kind of confused.
and this is the thing. I mean, look at what we're already spending on the military. Look at the budget we just came up with. And again, we can't afford it. This is not sustainable. And again, we are still having trouble all around the world, not in spite of us, but I'm also willing to say, and I lose a lot of people over this, but probably because of our activities. So anyway, that's all I want to comment on that. Mitt, no, just say no, Utah. I pray you do, but I'm afraid that he will be our next senator. But I'm going to speak out all I can. So today is President's Day. Here is a quote, and I want to see if you can tell me where this is from, and I bet you can. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, well, I give it away here, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. I recently wrote an article about the Church of National Government. And this being President's Day, I thought, well, let's look at, I'm going to refer you to the other side with Joshua and Mike for their really well done podcast on Abraham Lincoln and what he really did. But, the role of the president, as you described in your show very well, is one that is limited. The presidential role, the office of the executive, was really supposed to be a minor role in government. He was supposed to really just execute the will of the legislative branch, was supposed to be the strongest body in government. And okay, sorry, somebody's trying to send me a message here. But the problem is, it is now elevated to the role of a national king. A while back, I wrote an article. It was published again in the American Conservative, by the 10th Amendment Center. And what we talk about is how the role has now evolved into, or again, devolved, I should say, into the role of somebody that we expect to solve all of our problems. So the article starts, time and again, for every new politician and every new appointee, we hear the same argument. Well, we can't find one we agree with on everything, or no one's perfect. We just have to do the best we can and keep moving in the right direction. The sophomoric approach always gives us the same result, and that is we compromise on our principles. But there's one thing we never compromise on, Jeff, and that is the size and scope of our government. And we always end up with a bigger government. case in point, look what happened with Donald Trump's administration. We're really not seeing much of a reduction here. In fact, everybody's cheering about about our tax cut, but now the proposed gas tax is going to eat up about 60% of what we've gained in that regard. And I'm going to take a moment just to read feedback as it comes in. Let me see. We're getting a lot of activity here, and thank you very much. Utah is so lucky to have you. Truth shall be heard. We're doing our best. And I got to say, Jeff, it was really cool to now have the opportunity from K-Talk Radio as well, and the people I'm meeting out here, to have this voice of limited government, because there weren't many people out here talking about it. Paul Jensen in the morning, I'm on his show on Tuesdays, is like-minded. But again, we just are getting the opportunity, and having Kevin Gutzman on the air and for people to hear him. Some lights are going on out here, so maybe we can effectuate a change. So as I said earlier, once these candidates are elected, they merely perpetuate a system of government that is more about their maintaining power than about protecting liberties of the people they were elected to represent. So do we have to have a perfect candidate on all issues? We're not going to get that. There are about 320 million of us. And as I alluded to earlier, when I was talking to my friend Shiloh on Friday, he had said he was afraid of having instability. We need a Supreme Court to determine what the law is and what it means, so we don't have fighting in the streets, so we don't have anarchy. And my point to him is, the reason we have this default to look to 9 unelected officials, 9 politically connected lawyers and their government-issued costumes, for them to tell over 320 million people what the law is. That is exactly what the Revolutionary War, what I should say is our war for independence, was fought over. A complete lack of representation. Why in the world would we want to go back to something like that? That is why everybody's fighting, because nobody feels like they're being heard. And who are the people that are being heard now the most? The minority contingencies, and by that I don't mean race, but I mean segment of the population, who are giving the Democrat Party money. Remember, once upon a time, about 20 or 30 years ago, homosexuality was viewed as a mental disorder. Well, you give the Democrat Party enough money and they'll go to bat for you. And this is what we're seeing now. So recall now that the Constitution had set up a federal system. The central government, or the general government as they referred to it, had few enumerated powers, and those not delegated to it remained with the states. Does this sound familiar? I know I drone on and on and on about this. The powers of the new government were few. The powers of the states were numerous and indefinite. James Madison said that the government the Constitution created was one that was federal in nature, not national. And this is the problem when we try to elect a national leader. Nobody's going to be happy. The powers the states granted the new government were specifically listed, with the powers of Congress being enumerated in Article 1, Section 8, executive and judicial branches detailed in 2 and 3, respectively. And I refer you to Jeff's show, The Paradigm Shift, that was aired right before mine, where he discussed in greater detail the powers of the executive. My show last week went into it as well. So when we're talking now, going back to the ratification debates, further assurances were needed to get all the states on board. So a Bill of Rights was added, and okay, hold on. I'm going to share again my listener feedback. I really appreciate everybody that's listening, and I want to acknowledge them. We have anarchy now because we do not have laws if they can be changed on a whim. Excellent point, Michael, and I'm going to actually address that because a caller chimed in at the end of last week's show on K-Talk that I wasn't able to adequately address. So again, we have the Bill of Rights because the preamble explains the states expressed a desire in order to prevent misconstruction or abuse of its powers that further declaratory and restrictive clauses should be added. Well, now after this shooting in Florida, everybody's demanding President Trump be the one to solve this problem. And the government has to, now the national government has to solve this problem of AR-15s. Well, what is an AR-15? It's a scary gun, but it's a gun nonetheless. Go back to the preamble, go back to the Bill of Rights, go back to the Article 1, Section 8. Nowhere does Congress have the authority to regulate firearms, but this is part and parcel of this de facto acceptance of nationalism. So again, the goal here was to gain public confidence that this government would fulfill its beneficent ends, not do the very thing it is doing today. Again, looking to the perfect candidate, going to our presidents now when it comes to national elections, what should we be looking for? Their stance on abortion, gay rights, government, schools, jobs, the economy, immigration policies. By the way, I have another article on immigration policies. It's called The Constitutional Solution to Immigration. That is also published by the 10th Amendment Center. Should we be looking for a president that's going to solve our healthcare issues, the war on drugs, or his opposition or his position opposing that? Not one single of these examples falls within the proper scope and purpose of the Constitution as ratified, yet every single one of those issues was a focus during the past presidential election cycle. I remember being very disappointed, Jeff, when Trump was saying he went from we're going to repeal Obamacare to we are going to repeal and replace Obamacare. Nobody has the fortitude to say that this is not a position, a role of the national or the general government. Again, we have 320 people on this continental landmass known as these United States, plural. But somehow we're supposed to come together and unite. And if not, somebody who is simply good enough or not, Hillary Clinton or any other candidate to whom you are personally opposed. So if all we required of an acceptable candidate were this, I think we'd be on a much better track. What we need is somebody who has a comprehension of the federal system of government and the proper role of government, which isn't to provide all the stuff I mentioned above, but it is to defend jealously our liberty. If we stuck to that principle, imagine the size and the scope of government today. Now, people will justify, well, we need the USDA, we need Labor Relations Board, we need all of these other agencies to maintain the regulatory policies of Congress, because there's just too many things. But again, if we held them accountable to Article 1, Section 8, and stopped this nonsense of implied powers, then we wouldn't need all these agencies. If we stuck to this principle, imagine the size and scope of this general government today, the absence of these endless bureaucratic, illegal agencies and endless intrusions upon our everyday lives. Less tax dollars would be stolen. We would have a general government small enough and constrained enough to keep us from this cycle of endless wars and imperialism, going back to what we were discussing earlier with Mitt Romney. Difficult social policy issues and decisions would be at at state and local levels. Last week, Dwayne Stovall called right before I could get on to this topic, and he said also, this is a matter of scale and representation. Do you really think we have representation at the, again, pardon my French, national level? We have a good friend that I used to do radio with. I'm going to keep his name quiet for right now, but he was a senior legislative assistant, and he was very outspoken about the fact that the representative for whom he worked never even saw the letters from constituents. Assistants would just sign off and email it back, and he would never see it. We have no voices. The lobbyists, the corporate interests, the people with a lot of money. AFL-CIO, closest building to Congress, by the way. Take a trip over to Washington, D.C., and you'll see it yourself. In fact, they happily point it out when you take a bus tour. So these
Suzanne?
Yeah.
Suzanne, I don't know if you got my message, but speaking of Mitt Romney,
Yes.
Ben McClintock from Defending Utah is on the phone.
I think he just said he had to go. Is he still there?
I'm not sure. I'm going to take him off a hold.
Okay. Yeah, I think he had to go.
Are you
Ben,
still
are you
here?
still there? You know what? I did not know he was on the line, so he said he was sorry.
Okay. Sorry about that, Ben. If you're still listening, I didn't want to interrupt Suzanne because you were on a good roll there. And I kept posting it in the messages, but you weren't, obviously you didn't see my message. So
yeah.
All right, sorry.
Yeah, I'll tell him later. I'm going to be on the air with him tomorrow on K Talk anyway. So, but yeah, I want him to chime in. I want him to have more presence on the show. Ben McClintock is from Defending Utah, a really sharp guy. So remember now, the founding generation went to war over the issue of a system of government that influenced their lives, yet did not allow for representation and had no accountability to them. This is what we have today. We have a national government that pays mere lip service to the Constitution, our own version of parliamentary sovereignty. Remember, England didn't have a written constitution, so pretty much everything Parliament did was legal, and they got away with it. And this is something, again, we went to war with. When we talk about honoring those who have sacrificed, these are the people that sacrificed for our freedom. You can go to Lexington. There's a little park with a lawn in the center of that town, and there's a area that's fenced off, and under that little piece of grass are the remains of the first 8 who died for our freedom. So when we support candidates who are merely good enough on any given issue, we continue to surrender our liberties and our revolutionary legacy. Utah, people of Utah, I implore you to put your values, our liberty, our sovereignty ahead of a man who has the LDS stamp on him. Put these other values first, because that is ultimately going to be what is going to be the vanguard of our religious liberties and our other liberties as well. Let me just go to a few more comments we had here. Again, I apologize for missing that first call, and I have a post here. Oh, well, thank you, listener. My good friend Jose is listening. He's chiming in. You know, there are so many options for people to listen to. We have not only our mainstream media, Jeff, but I think we have such a saturated marketplace, and that's both good and bad. You know, we want to get away from the media that I just think their coverage of these very important issues is absolutely abysmal. But there, you know, where do you turn? Where do you know to listen to? So when people take time out of their day, and I say time and time again, that when people give up their time, that is something they're never going to get back. So when they take the time to listen to us out of all these other options, it's very humbling. And I want to thank all of you that are doing that as well. Speaking of President's Day, you know, we really do not discuss the importance. We have what they call one generic President's Day, and we just bundle them all in. Well, what do we mean now? We are taking time to pay tribute to all of our presidents, good and bad. And what you'll see is many of the media shows. In fact, I was in Southern California. A friend of mine recorded an episode with one who was doing a week of shows, covering 5 presidents, and Jefferson and Madison were covered, as was going to be Lincoln, Kennedy, and I forgot the other one. So, and I'm willing to bet that the episode on Lincoln was going to glorify him. But I want to return to an article. The first one I'd had published, the American Conservative published this article, and it came up again in the Imaginative Conservative. And when I went on a trip a couple years ago in 2015, I was really excited to take my boys on a journey to Virginia to see Monticello, Montpelier, and let them know about what our founding generation stood for. So I took them on this trip, and I was really shocked by what I saw there. I went to Monticello, and as soon as you walk up there, there is a sandwich board advertising an app called The Slave Life at Monticello. The goal of the tour and the experience was really an attempt to divert attention from the man who owned this property, Thomas Jefferson, one of America's founding fathers, to slavery. The docent leading the tour of the house never missed an opportunity. As we moved from one floor to another, we were instructed to imagine how difficult it was for the enslaved servants to carry meal trays up and down this narrow stairway. At every hearth we heard, imagine enslaved servants having to carry wood up to these fireplaces. It went on and on. Now, nobody's saying that slavery shouldn't be discussed at this time, but my point of writing this article, and I was harshly rebuked by liberals and members of the African American community who pretty much said, because I was one comment said, imagine a white woman goes to a plantation and is disgusted that slavery is being discussed. Well, first of all, my being a white woman should not discount my ability to have an opinion on such matters. Second of all, I couldn't help but noticing that the home of Thomas Jefferson to them was nothing more than a plantation. So perspective comes into play there. But again, we all have a right to say what we want to, we all have a right to our opinion on here. So I think slavery should be discussed. But again, this was at the expense of the other issues here, namely, most importantly, what Thomas Jefferson really stood for. So we had this revisionist style performance was, I want to contrast Poplar Forest, Thomas Jefferson's other home. We went to that as well. That wasn't the focus at all. And when I complimented them at the front, at the gift shop there where the management was, I was getting some very harsh looks from another woman who worked there, and the docent had told me that there were some people there trying to change the focus of the spirit and the what Thomas Jefferson stood for to focusing more on slavery. Well, that same day that we went to Monticello, we also went to Montpelier, which is the home of James Madison. And there was a movie introducing it, and you see these at a lot of these places. And it was really what I call here in the article, a laughable exercise in self-contradiction. On the one hand, masters and slaves were said to experience a mutually beneficial relationship. Yes, I will tell you right now, one person should never own another. Slavery was awful. But you know what? Guess who owns us now? Now we're all slaves. The government owns us all. We get our little numbers when we're born. We get our little tax chattel numbers, our social security numbers, so they can track us forever. So yes, we are still owned. Now we're all owned. So
Suzanne, I just got into a discussion on Facebook on this with somebody, and I'm not going to get into who they were or what, but every time I see a candidate running for public office use the term taxpayer, I always chime in, and I'm respectful. I just say, listen, please don't refer to us as taxpayers. That reduces us to nothing more than a resource. And in the true sense of the word taxpayer, what they're calling you is their slave, because what you are is a tax slave. You are there to provide money that they need to steal from someone to give to someone else or to accomplish their power grabs. And so I tell every one of them that refer to us as citizens. I'm a citizen. I am the sovereign. What do the people have? What power do the people have? According to Jefferson, we make or abolish governments. We are the sovereigns. So to stop calling me a resource, and quite honestly, you just hit right on it. You just said we're slaves. We get our slave number when we get our social security number. That is how most of the candidates, and you know what I said in the PS to that is, I've never once, and I would shock you the number of people, I would shock you if I told you the names of people I said this to. Never once have I ever had a positive response. A lot of times I'm ignored, or most of the time I get berated by the candidate or the followers of the candidate. For some reason, they are quite happy being a resource, and I don't get it, but it's just what it is.
I have to chime in on that too, because I had an interaction with the head of the Libertarian Party out here in Utah who blocked me. I want to go back with this article, but you were exactly right. They consider us all our taxpayers. We get our numbers, and we are chattel to state, local, all the way up to the top governments. So now going back to, let's see, Montpelier. Again, now there is a huge project there to put slave quarters where they didn't exist before when James Madison lived there, but they want to focus again on slavery there. So here, going back to the film that I was mentioning, they, let me go back to, so we had that film, and they mentioned that there was a, you know, the slaves and the owners of the home and the slaves did work together, and that it was mutually beneficial. When I had also said that the slaves would have starved had they just been released, I'll get to that in a moment, the harsh outcry that I had for that. But the movie concluded by evoking the image of hundreds of African Americans enslaved to benefit a single white family. So did they even bother, to edit their own efforts? Because this was an absolutely feckless presentation. At the beginning, they said how they worked together. And at the end, they said that they were enslaved to benefit one single white family. So after viewing the film, we took the tour of the home. The dining room featured cardboard cutouts of individuals who had been known to visit James and Dolly Madison. One such figure was the Marquis de Lafayette, and our guide had indicated chimed James Madison for not freeing the slaves. I mean, they just always had to get this in there. So I took this moment to inquire whether the Marquis considered James Madison a caring human being, because Madison had simply, had he simply freed his slaves, they would likely have starved. Oh my gosh, this got the commenters on my article up in a hizzy. How do you think, what makes you think they would have starved? They were the ones that grew all the food and they ran the place. But here's my point. Where would they have been able to grow food? They didn't own any land. They wouldn't have had the opportunity to take care of themselves. Also, any slaves that were freed when it became legal to free them had to leave Virginia within a year. So she asked, it would have been, she had said it would be necessary to provide for freed slaves. So I asked her for how long. I mean, I think that's a fair question. How long would a master who owned slaves be expected to care for them? Would that include their descendants? Would he also be responsible for slaves he inherited? And would this be in perpetuity? Where would she draw the line? She even answered in the affirmative when I asked if history would view Madison in a better light if he released his slaves and they perished. I also asked if the Marquis would respect the laws making the emancipation of slaves illegal. She responded that emancipation was illegal, quote, in some states. I informed her that she was standing in one such state, the state of Virginia. And she admitted that today we do not look at the slavery issue. And this is important because they come right out and admit it here. We don't look at the slavery issue in the context of the time it existed. But she seemed to be perfectly at ease with her flawed and biased analysis. And her parting shot on the subject was, Madison did not think blacks and whites could live together, to which I replied that neither did Lincoln, the great emancipator. At that point, another visitor, they were getting frustrated me with at this point, asked if we could please go back to talking about the room, to which I quit, by all means, let's instead discuss the color of the wallpaper. So movies from both Monticello and Montpelier featured images of Barack Obama and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Are we seeing a common pattern here? As well as quotations about freedom and equality. Well, freedom for whom? The slaves? What about liberty? It struck me that promoting the progressive goal of equality is the end of all these presentations. The slaves over a century and a half post-mortem are still being used as a means to further this political agenda. This also happened at when I went to the home of John Calhoun in at Clemson University, and when I went to Colonial Williamsburg. So what is behind all this? Well, we have a leftist named David Rubenstein, who's putting a ton of money into people, into these places, putting this message forth. Nowhere did we hear about the principles that Thomas Jefferson wrote about in the Declaration of Independence. We were just told he was the drafter of it and the drafter of the Virginia Statute on Religious Freedom, the founder of UVA. That's all well and good, but we really didn't get into what he stood for. What did the Declaration really tell us? Well, probably the reason they obfuscate this message is the Declaration of Independence reaffirms the right of mankind to overthrow a government that no longer suits its ends, the needs and the liberties of the people, and the right of people to overthrow such a government, throw it off, and start a new one. Interestingly enough, now these are our founding principles. There is a statute, when we talk about the incorporation doctrine, the statute from which the incorporation doctrine came about was Gitlin versus New York, where it was a crime to overthrow to advocate the violent overthrow of government. There is also a federal statute prohibiting the advocation of the violent overthrow of government. We were founded by the violent overthrow of government. But how convenient is it now to say, well, yeah, that's how we got here. And we had another coup in 1787 when we overthrew the Articles of Confederation, even though nobody had the charter, the responsibility. They were never given the authority to do so, but we did it anyway. But now you can't do it anymore. We are here and we are here to stay. I find it very infuriating. And today on President's Day, we celebrate our enslavement. You have any thoughts on that, Jeff?
No, you hit it right out of the park on that. Like I said, I had this very discussion about the whole notion of tax slaves just recently again. We really are at a point where we have, and again, this is why I said what I said in our show. This is why we do this. We're not doing this because we are wonderful at radio or we're wonderful at, whatever. But we truly believe in the framing and the founders' principles. Those, again, going back to our old motto, 18th century ideas for 21st century thinkers. We're going back to those principles that were so important, that were so foundational, but we've lost them. And in big part because we've abdicated education to the public system. And the government has an interest in propagating good little status. So, and that's where we're getting all this good. They're reinforcing that they're good slaves to the state at the public school level.
Yeah. Well, speaking of public schools, let's turn our attention now. You and I did a show last week concerning the school shooting in Florida, and as expected, we have the contingency saying clearly we need to ban assault rifles. AR-15, that's the boogeyman. As I mentioned before, once upon a time, the handgun was the boogeyman of the gun-grabbing progressives, and that failed completely. People were not going to give up the ultimate defense weapon that everybody could take with them, which is a handgun. So they decided to look towards a new boogeyman, and that's a scary, what they call militarized assault weapons, or most notably here, the AR-15. It's scary looking, it's intimidating. And do you recall, Jeff, that footage of the newscaster who fired one and said he got PTSD and started crying after it?
Yes, I remember that one. And I also remember the one where the guy was, the other reporter was decrying the powerful nature of the AR-15 when he shot the watermelon. Well, the problem was it was a pump shotgun.
And then you see footage of a 7-year-old firing at a 7-year-old girl. So the moral of the story is a 7-year-old girl.
Jason has shot. I think Jason was probably 7 or 8 when he shot the AR the first time, and he had no issue. The AR is not a difficult firearm to shoot. And I had this discussion with Jason yesterday. I was like, for as much as I hate the AR, I love the AR. You know what? Are there better weapon systems out there in the world? Absolutely. But you know what? It's been around for a long time and it functions. It's a great firearm. I mean, so anyway, it's scary looking to some, but it's just a tool. It's all it is. It's no different than any other tools. No different than the car. I mean, how many thousands of people died this year in drunk driving accidents? The tool But they're not blaming that tool, but they're going to blame another tool. It's
because
just, it's crazy.
This isn't a matter of whether or not we need to control guns to control violence, because we're going to have violence regardless. In fact, in China, I think 33 people were just killed in a knife attack, where we have guns that are banned. What do we have in Sweden? In IKEA that time, we had a knife attack in IKEA, and then IKEA said, well, we're just not going to sell knives here anymore. There was another, I think it was in Norway, a gun attack when nobody else was armed, and somehow somebody got hold of a gun. It just happens. Look at what's going on in Europe. In France, we had these terrorists going around with the AKs and shooting everybody in the bistro. We saw a woman who was lying there on the ground, and she only didn't get shot to the head because the firearm malfunctioned. So we have an unarmed society where we have criminals. Or if they're not going to use the guns, guess what? Now they're using trucks. We just had a truck attack in New York City. So what we have here, as you said the other day, we have a heart problem, not a people problem, turning our attention to the schools. We're seeing these shootings in public schools. Well, what is common with these public schools? First of all, they're all gun-free zones. Second of all, what is causing these children, these males that are doing these shooting? And as far as I'm aware, there are no shootings of females in these schools. Nobody's really looking at the problem of the schools themselves. It's all, we need to control these guns. And last week I got in quite a debate with a woman when I said, well, clearly if your goal is to save lives, because if we could save just one life and stop this violence, then this is what we need to do. Well, I said, well, then clearly if you want to save lives, you support abolishing human abortion, right? And the response is, don't change the subject. Well, wait, back up the truck. You said you wanted to save lives. So we've got almost 60 million dead babies here, and you're not talking about the abortion issue at all. We want to focus on the firearms. So really your plea about saving lives is disingenuous. It's not even mistaken. It's disingenuous. You're lying, because the ultimate goal is for them to have their socialist utopia. And they cannot do that unless they can effectuate a confiscation of firearms. So what they're going to do is start with something that makes people feel good about themselves and take this AR-15. Remember, we had, I believe it was a 10-year ban on, quote, assault weapons. And when that sunset ran out, we did not see any increase in violence with the guns that were banned. They are not the problem. The people are the problem. The system is the problem. So what's going on in these public school systems to make people, the kids in them, so miserable? Well, gee, I just played Let's Answer Your Own Question. They are public schools. They are run by the government. They have turned into little mini prisons. Look at them. I had a show, and I've got to get her back. I've got to call her and get her back on, Jeff. I had done an interview with a lady named Dr. Marianne Block. She is a fascinating woman. She became a medical doctor. After the doctors, she was enlisting to help her daughter, 7-year-old daughter with a medical problem, failed miserably, almost caused her daughter to die. She became a medical doctor and started treating kids who were supposedly diagnosed with ADHD. And we discussed on my show before, the one common factor that you're seeing with these mass shooters, you can go back for years, is the psychotropic drugs. These schools hand them out like M&Ms to these kids, particularly little boys, because they need help focusing. And the problem is, as she said, these very powerful mind-altering drugs are administered and prescribed absent any kind of medical testing. There is no blood testing. There is no testing for chemical imbalances, no testing for nutritional deficiencies or other disorders that could be causing these symptoms. She also said what's being ignored is the nutrition in these kids. Often kids are just thrown some cereal and that's all carbs, that's all sugar. Once that metastasizes and these kids run out of the ability to process this, they go into pure adrenal function and becomes fight or flight. So these kids have to be drugged. I'm going to have her on again. And I said, why is everybody focusing on the firearms and not these psychotropic drugs, because this should be on every single news network. And she pointed out, I'm sorry to say, something that I didn't notice until she mentioned it, because we are so conditioned to seeing the same thing over and over again. And she said, look at the advertisements on the major news networks. Look at the advertisers on the television and radio stations, particularly television. Pharmaceutical products, the pharmaceutical companies, have a stranglehold on the network because they pay so much of the revenue to them on advertising. And she said, I was even told this, that nobody would let me on the air because the advertisers wouldn't stand for it. But what everybody will get behind is banishing these scary looking guns. The justification being, well, the founding generation never envisioned AR-15s. Well, that's not the point. The point was of the Second Amendment was to preserve the ability of the free citizens to fight off a tyrannical government should one ever arise. That was the point of the Second Amendment. So if the military, a standing army has AR-15s, then the people should have them. And we stand for not having them. We accept the fact that we're not allowed to have full auto weapons, but the military has them. And why do we stand for that? Because we are sheep. I want to turn attention. I mentioned Mike Meharry earlier, and he wrote an article that I want to talk about. And this is something that the leftists seem to ignore. They don't like violence, but what are government attempts to end gun violence going to be? That's going to be violent in and of itself. Let me turn to the article for a moment. A lot of people think the best way to end gun violence is to take away guns. They forget that this will in turn require violence, or at least the threat of gun violence, to pursue this goal. Many who favor stricter gun laws, including the prohibition of such as the AR-15, couch their argument in moral terms. They'll say things like, and I mentioned this earlier, if they save one life, it's worth it. We can't allow people to have these weapons capable of killing hundreds of people. But what these advocates claim is a moral high ground by invoking their desire to reduce violence and save lives. Again, they forget about the babies that are being murdered on a daily basis. They ignore the fact that their solution is steeped in violence. It will require force and coercion to take unapproved weapons away from people who already possess them. And it will take more coercion and violence to ensure people don't get their hands on unapproved guns. In fact, the prohibition people really aren't anti-gun, and nor are they anti-violence. And again, if you point out the hypocrisy of their arguments, as I tried to last week, you're just called crazy. You're an absolute nutcase. They just want the government to maintain a monopoly on guns and violence. So again, they don't dislike violence. They only want the government to have the monopoly. They're fine with it as long as it serves their interests and as long as they don't have to commit it with their own hands. And isn't that the heart and soul of the leftist agenda? Especially, I notice the anti-hunters. Oh my gosh, how'd you kill that poor animal? Hey, you know what? I just do for myself what you don't have the fortitude to do for yourself. You'll go to the store and buy meat, but you don't have the, temerity to go and kill it yourself. And meat that is, by the way, had a much better life than that poor cattle. Anyway, they delegate violence to government agents and then preach against the violence as if they have clean hands. That's a great point. Always remember, every law is enforced at gunpoint. I don't care if you run a stop sign, if you don't pay your taxes, whatever it is, if you resist, ultimately the force will be at the end of a gun. You can literally die, like that guy in New York, over selling cigarettes separately. So in the simplest terms, any ban on any kind of gun will immediately turn certain people into criminals. And this was also my argument against national reciprocity, because there's going to be a standard that will ensnare people once they come up with different, a national standard for types of firearms that people carry. They will resist giving up their weapons for whatever reason. These people would never use their guns except in self-defense, yet they will become subject to aggression by the state. And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to wrap this up. If they get caught with their illegal weapon, the state will demand they give it up. If they refuse, they will be locked in a cage. If they resist, they will be subdued and possibly killed. The process is anything but peaceful and nonviolent, and it erodes their moral high ground that they seem to be standing on. And again, this is what I saw time and time again. They don't care if the government imposes violence on us. And again, really quick, I've got to share this. There's a woman that said, a reporter, I'm going to see if I can find it, that said she had this child been aborted. A woman puts her baby up for adoption. He grows up to be a violent young man who will spend the rest of his life in prison for a mass murder. Please tell me how abortions are wrong. So these people not only advocate the government having violence, but they want to prevent violence by murdering unborn babies. These liberals pretend to be the champions of the defenseless, the disenfranchised, the minorities. Who is more defenseless? What is more defenseless than an unborn baby? I submit to you, please do not fall for their hypocrisy. We're out of time. I want to thank you for joining me on the Wasatch Report here on the Cerberus Radio Network. I'm Suzanne Sherman here on the Cerberus Radio Network. We defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thank you for listening.